So, these old bags are good worm food. They're all sort of shot. And I'm just going to throw these weeds on top. Whoa! Hey, it's Greg on here with MaritimeGardening.com. It's a beautiful Sunday morning here around the middle of October, and doing a little bit of work in the garden. I thought I'd take you along with me. Today I'm going to take this Hugelkultur bed and get it ready to plant something in. I'm just going to show you, my point is to show you how easy it is to prep a bed and get it ready for next year when you use this approach, right, the no-till approach. And this is just the way I come at it. There's lots of different ways to go about it, but anyway, I think you might find it interesting because it's pretty easy. So have a watch. Okay, so here's the bed we got here, and I'm trying to focus on the bed, not on me here. And I got some leftover mulch here, and I got some different weeds and stuff. So right now I just want the weeds. I want to gather up weeds that were pulled, because I'm going to show you what I'm going to do with them. They're very useful. I tend to let a lot of weeds sort of go, and then, like, these are just weeds I pulled from different parts of the garden. I threw them on top of here. They're sort of like clumps, right? And I got a plan for these. I'll probably make another Hugelkultur bed this fall, and I just bury them underneath. You know, you dig a trench and you bury them. That's a great way to deal with weeds. This is more like a mulch material, so I'll throw it over there. I'm just basically raking off the mulch. I'm going to plant some garlic in this bed this fall. So I'm just getting to a point where I can do that, where I want to get all the weeds off. There's not that many, but there is some. So I'm just trying to separate the mulch from the weeds, because the mulch is going to go right back on top after I've done my planting. It really doesn't take that long. Just rake her up. Oh, there's a leftover onion that never got picked. Still good. It's amazing what you find when you go over a garden as carefully as you can, and you still find stuff. And I got some rubbish from other parts of the garden here, and just going to add the mulch to that. Get that out of there. Maybe a pitchfork. Alright, so I've gotten all the weeds out of there. Now I just want to get it, or sort of getting all the mulch out, and there's different ways to come at this. I'm going to plant something in here. So I sort of want to have the space all figured out. I wasn't going to plant anything here, I just pile a bunch of mulch on and leave it. But I'm going to plant some garlic here. Make another video on that, because I'm going to use a slightly different technique than what you've seen me use before. Anyway, I just want these weeds out because I don't want them proliferating. And a lot of people complain about weeding, and especially when they use mulches like hay and stuff like that. But if you use a no-till approach, you'll find that anything that's growing in your garden is easy to pull out. Look how easily these are coming out, right? And this soil is mostly clay, and everything's still coming out just fine. This is a Hugelkultur bed. If you don't know what that is, there's a bunch of rotten logs buried underneath the ground here, and it's a way of building a garden using existing soil and piling things that rot slowly underneath. And it's nothing I invented. It's been around for a while, but they work really well. It's a great way to sort of build a garden without buying soil or having to invest in anything like that. You're just using what's there. All I did here was dig a hole, bury a bunch of rotten wood, put some, garden waste and rubbish like that down, maybe a bit of horse manure, and I put the soil back on. So this soil was dug up and then replaced. And all that stuff underneath breaks down slowly, and the worms do the work, and different organisms in the soil circulating the nutrients and all of that throughout the soil. You don't have to do the work. You don't till. Oh, one more weed right there. Alright, so we got it all evened out. This garden's ready for planting garlic. One of the reasons I'm always saying weeds aren't a problem is that if you let them grow to a good length, right, and your soil isn't too compacted, if you grab them up like this and sort of pull slowly, you can usually get them out roots and all. Right, so all the weeds that are growing along this edge, right, instead of cutting them and cutting them and cutting them, I just left them alone. And now I'm going to throw them on top of one of my garden beds. You'll see what I mean in a second. But like all of these, for the most part, and they don't always cooperate. Look how easily that came out, right? It's a good little workout. It's like a deadlift, I guess, if you had to classify it. You sort of go side to side, rock a little bit, lift with your legs, bang it off. Another one there. And this is all, I mean, what am I doing here? I'm gathering fertilizer. Alright, so I got all my weeds, and I even have some of this old paper here. This is just old leaf bag paper. And, oh geez, I got a couple onions here. What the? Undetected, the undiscovered onion. Shakespeare reference. Alright, so I'm pretty sure all the weeds in here are under control. In this garden I grew garlic last year. I grew garlic mulched with seaweed. There's still a lot of good seaweed here. That's going to continue to break down. And I intend to grow tomatoes here. This garden's outside my garden enclosure, and I found that the wild animals here, the bears and the deer and the rabbits and the porcupines and the raccoons, they all seem to leave tomatoes alone. I grew tomatoes in a different sort of there's a row, a string of garden beds here all parallel to one another, and the one at the very top was a tomato bed this season, right? So 2018. So I'm just gonna kind of roll it down here, and tomatoes here this year, tomatoes up one next year, up another one the next year, and so on and so forth. That's basically the level of sophistication with my crop rotation. I just move everything over one. That seems to work out okay. I don't apply too much thought to it. These old bags are good worm food. They're all sort of shot. And I'm just going to throw these weeds on top. Whoa! Sorry. I'm going to throw the weeds on top here. Now, I have a lot to do today, and it's just an easy way to deal with it. And as I find weeds, I'm just going to throw them on top here until the whole thing's covered with those. And all I'm trying to achieve here, each of these weeds, clumps, in the roots, there's all kinds of good stuff, nutrients and so on. And it'll keep this bed, I'm putting a kind of like an insulating layer on top, so it is still going to freeze up in the winter, but it won't freeze as much. I've noticed the beds that I mulch heavily, they thaw out a lot quicker than the beds that aren't mulched, and I can get started a lot sooner. So, because I don't think they freeze as deep, right, because they've got a bit of insulation. So, and if you get the insulation on earlier, in the fall, seems to work even more. If you insulate them after they've frozen, it doesn't seem to do a lot of good. So I'll keep adding stuff like this. And the great thing about adding these sort of weed clumps with the roots and everything is that every time it rains and snows and all that sort of stuff, nutrients that are in those things get pushed into the soil below, right? Now, next year, when I go to plant my tomatoes, right? Tomatoes are that sort of plant where all you really need to do is make a hole and jam them in, right? I mean, around here you don't direct seed tomatoes, or it's pretty hard to get away with direct seeding them unless you're doing it in a hothouse or in a cold frame or something like that. So you usually have some kind of transplant. So even with all this, the cold will kill all of this, especially if you put the roots up, right? So the cold will kill all of these weeds, right? But it'll take a while for them to break down. But you just make a hole and jam your transplant in there. So I'm just going to cover this with weeds and rubbish and stuff like that, and next spring, when it's time to plant, I'll just kind of push stuff aside and make a little hole and jam my tomatoes in there, and they'll do just fine. So really, that's all for a lot of my gardens, especially things like that where you got plants spaced out. That's all you really need to do. And also, you know, again, it puts your weeds to use, right? Why should your weeds be a problem? Why not think of those weeds as a solution to a problem, right? They're taking nutrients out of the soil. You can use them to put nutrients back into the soil. Anyway, for me, that's one way I like to go at my gardening. You look at something that might be perceived as a problem, like weeds growing in your garden, and you say, you know what that weed's doing? That is a tough, persistent plant that can grow anywhere. And no matter where that seed lands, it finds a way to grow quickly and gather a lot of nutrients out of the soil, even if the soil is poor. So knowing that about a weed, you can put that weed to use. Well, here's a thing that's gathered a lot of nutrients out of the soil. It's probably got a lot of good stuff in its roots. Why don't I just rip that whole thing out and throw it on top of one of my gardens, and those nutrients can just trickle down into my garden, right? And I, use a garden where you can just move things aside and plug your plants in. And that's kind of how Hugelkultur beds work anyway. And for the most part, when you lay something like this on top, it's not going to live, right? The roots are sort of exposed to the air, and the plant's not invincible. And it's really, it's getting cold right now, so the cold and the air and all that sort of stuff, this weed is going to die, right? So now it's just mulch for me. And everything that's in these roots is going in the ground, feeding the soil. And I should have excellent tomatoes here next year. Anyway, I hope you found that interesting, gave you some food for thought. And if it did, please like, share, subscribe, and check out my podcast, maritimegardening.com. Until next time, get out there, get at it. Have fun in your garden. Thanks for watching.